Well, hello there. It seems our usually quiet, polite, and apologetic neighbors to the north, Canada, have decided to spice things up. They've gone and inked a new trade agreement with China. That's right, China. This isn't just some minor tweak to lumber tariffs, folks. It's a move that has sent ripples, or perhaps more accurately, minor tsunamis, across the geopolitical landscape. The agreement, cleverly dubbed the Sino-Canadian Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or CCEP, was announced just last month, catching many, including it seems their closest ally, by surprise. The significance is huge. For decades, Canada's economic fortunes have been tethered to the United States like a loyal, slightly chilly Labrador. This deal signals a clear and frankly rather gutsy attempt to loosen that leash. Initial reactions have been mixed. The new era isn't just a catchphrase here, it's a statement of intent, and the world, especially the part of it located directly south of the 49th parallel, is watching very, very closely. Now, to understand why Canada might suddenly feel the urge to play footsie with a dragon, we need to look at what's been happening in their own backyard. Or rather, their very large, very loud, and recently very tariff-happy neighbor, the United States of America. For the past few years, U.S. trade policy has been less about free trade and more about fees for trade. This has created an atmosphere of profound economic unpredictability. The U.S. has been slapping tariffs on goods from all corners of the globe, and Canada, despite its closest friend and ally status, hasn't been entirely spared. Specifically, the automotive sector, a cornerstone of North American manufacturing, has been living under the constant threat of new U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles and parts. This protectionist stance from Washington has, understandably, made Canada a tad nervous. When your biggest customer starts acting erratically, you naturally start looking for other customers. The general feeling of uncertainty emanating from U.S. trade policies has been a significant catalyst for Canada's eastward glance. It's not just about specific tariffs. It's about the broader trend of economic nationalism and the potential for sudden disruptive policy shifts. So while Canada's move towards China is bold, it's also a pragmatic response to a changing and often challenging trade environment being shaped by its southern neighbor. So, Canada's making a strategic pivot. This isn't just about finding new markets, it's a conscious, deliberate effort to reduce its overwhelming economic dependence on the United States. For years, economists and policymakers in Canada have warned about the risks of having all their economic eggs in one American-sized basket. This new China deal is the most significant step yet in a long-term Canadian ambition to diversify its trade relationships and carve out a more independent economic path. The potential benefits for Canada are, on paper at least, quite enticing. China, with its massive population and rapidly growing middle class, represents a colossal market for Canadian goods and services. The agreement aims to smooth the path for these exports, reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers. For Canadian businesses, this could mean new growth opportunities, more jobs, and a welcome buffer against economic downturns or policy shifts in the U.S. market. However, this strategic diversification isn't without its own set of considerable risks and complexities. Cozying up to China is, to put it mildly, a delicate dance. Ultimately, this move is about Canada trying to gain more control over its own economic destiny. Carmakers to Canada. So, about this China thing. The Canadian automotive industry, a sector that's practically joined at the hip with its U.S. counterpart, has reacted to this China trade deal with a fascinating mix of cautious optimism, furrowed brows, and a whole lot of wait and see. This is an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians and contributes significantly to the national GDP. Major automakers with significant operations in Canada, think Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Honda, and Toyota, have been somewhat guarded in their public statements. On one hand, closer ties with China could open up new avenues for sourcing components, perhaps even at lower costs, or create new opportunities for exporting Canadian-made niche vehicles or technologies. On the other hand, there are deep concerns about increased competition from Chinese automakers, who are making huge strides in electric vehicle (EV) technology and production. For Canadian auto parts manufacturers, the deal presents a similar double-edged sword. Access to the vast Chinese market could be a massive boon, allowing them to sell their high-quality components to a new customer base. However, they also face the prospect of intensified competition from Chinese parts suppliers. The Canadian auto sector, particularly its unions, will be watching closely to ensure that any increased trade doesn't lead to a race to the bottom or undermine the hard-won gains of Canadian workers. The awkward threesome, U.S., Canada, and China's new extremely complicated trade tango. This Canada-China trade agreement throws a maple-flavored wrench into U.S.-Canada-China trade relations. North America has operated under the USMCA, a cohesive trade bloc. Now, Canada's deal with China tests this partnership. The United States is likely not thrilled. Washington has been in a trade and geopolitical arm wrestle with Beijing. Canada's move could be seen as undermining a united Western front. The USMCA requires notification for deals with non-market economies like China. While Canada likely followed the law, the spirit is debated. U.S. countermeasures or pointed diplomatic conversations are possible. Washington might scrutinize Canadian exports for Chinese components. This could lead to new trade friction between the U.S. and Canada. This new trade triangle creates a complex geopolitical dance. Your car's passport, now stamped in Beijing, thanks to Ottawa? The global auto supply chain shuffle. The ripple effects of Canada's new trade pact with China are set to send some serious tremors through the global automotive supply chain. This agreement isn't just about where fully assembled cars are sold. It's about where the thousands of components that go into making a modern vehicle are sourced, manufactured, and assembled. And with China being a dominant player in many of these areas, particularly EV batteries, Canada's deal could significantly redraw some of those supply lines. One of the most talked about possibilities is Canada potentially becoming a new gateway for Chinese automotive components or even fully built vehicles into the broader North American market. While direct imports of Chinese cars into the U.S. face high tariffs and political headwinds, components integrated into Canadian-made vehicles or parts might find an easier path. This could be particularly relevant for the burgeoning EV market, where Chinese companies control a significant portion of the battery supply chain. Canadian assembly plants might start incorporating more Chinese-sourced EV technology. This potential shift naturally has other automotive manufacturing nations watching closely. The car in your driveway might soon have a far more international backstory than you ever imagined. Oh Canada, or should we say, u.s-canada. The future is complicated and possibly Mandarin-inflected. This strategic pivot towards China is a watershed moment for Canada. For a nation defined by its U.S. and Commonwealth ties, this is a significant recalibration. The vision is a more economically sovereign Canada, integrated into Asia. However, this pursuit is fraught with challenges. Canada must balance economic benefits with democratic values. Domestically, debates will arise about deepening ties with China. Internationally, Canada will face pressure from the U.S. and allies. The opportunities are significant: access to the world's second-largest economy. Ultimately, Canada's future depends on managing these complexities. The road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is for sure: Canada and global trade will never be quite the same.